All right, everyone. Hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. Well, we have a very, very special, brave guest here with us today. Aaron Kindsvatter is a professor at the University of Vermont who has been blowing the whistle on what's been going on there. And so we're going to have a great chat about how he came to be in this. I mean, I think anyone who winds up in this position, it's an unexpected position to be in. Like this is not part of anyone's life plan to be a whistleblower or to spend their time fighting back against like critical race theory. So welcome, Aaron, to my channel. I'm so glad you're here.
Carlin, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Awesome. Well, I'm so looking forward. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the past, I think several months, even before all of this happened. And you're just like I want to say this genuinely. You're one of the best people in the world.
Oh,
Honestly. Just like I mean, I know that they're already painting you as like a racist and this horrible right-wing person, which is just absurd on several different levels. But you're one of those people that I think that the people in your life and hopefully the students you've had and even hopefully some of the relationships you've had, your personality is, I think, going to be able to shine through all of the nonsense. And maybe that'll even be a wake-up call for people who you're not the stereotypical person to do this.
yeah. Well, thank you for saying those things, Carlin. I just can't tell you how much it matters to hear those kinds of things because it is very hard to hear, from the outside world that one is a racist or one is a hateful person or any of the other terms that might get thrown at you if you don't toe the line on on ideas like teach-ins that are about turning towards whiteness, which is I guess what was one of the straws that broke the camel's back that's left me here with you today.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, I want to get there eventually, but there is a whole
Yeah.
long backstory leading up to this. And I actually was watching a little bit of your conversation with one of my favorite people, Benjamin Boyce, this morning. And it turns out you had actually been a fan of his for
Oh,
years.
for many years. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, all of this really started, and I think this was back around 2015 that Benjamin Boyce started doing his thing, and he's been a source of inspiration for me, and showed me that one can approach these conversations with both humanity and care and logic, and so I always really appreciated what he had to bring, and I started watching his seeking out persons like him when things started to become very strange in the counseling program at the University of Vermont. And I would say that happened, that really some of the woke ideology began to find its way into policy around 2014, 2015, which was about 5 years after Sue came out with his book on microaggressions. And that was a pivotal moment because that was the moment when one's intent was no longer considered to matter. The impact, or the perceived impact based on the subjective experience of those one is around, is what became the matter of focus. And it created this tense atmosphere. And it's interesting, Sue in his book and in his article even uses criminalized words like victim and perpetrator. And of course, everyone is very concerned about being labeled a perpetrator. And so it began to be much harder to have conversations about sensitive social issues that counselors need to discuss. And so that's when things started to get weird, and I spoke out at that time by writing an objection to the adoption by the University of Vermont of a bias response team. And what I objected to in particular is that they wouldn't define, well, they defined bias, but they defined it so broadly that it could be anything. Anything could be considered bias. And then they made it so that the system for reporting bias is secret. So someone could report perceived bias to the powers that be within the university, and you'd never know if you had been reported or if you had some kind of record or whatever. So that again casts this chill over the university where people began to be afraid to discuss sensitive topics for fear. And, regardless of where you are on the ideological spectrum, something could be reported for bias, and then presumably there's some sort of consequence for that. And so that's where this all really started for me. That's when I began to go public about this. It did not seem to put much of a dent in the university's response. The bias response team didn't change much. They changed some of the wording, but it still didn't. I consulted with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education after they had changed some of the wording about the bias response team, but it's still FIRE had said that, look, this is still secret. They still haven't defined what bias is, and this is still presents, a major restriction to free speech. So, I can't say that initially speaking out about the bias response team did much good.
Yeah. And it's actually funny that you bring that up, because one of the very first videos I ever did on this channel, and this was before I was out of the closet, was actually an hour-long rant about how microaggressions aren't a real thing.
Yeah.
And I actually went through all of this different research, because like Sue is the only person whose research says that microaggressions are a real thing. And there's all this follow-up subsequent research saying, no, these are not real. There's no evidence that these things exist. But of course he makes a living consulting with organizations about microaggressions.
Well, and he also uses a circular reasoning when he Lilienfeld in 2017 did an exhaustive literature review on microaggressions, and the problem is that that Lilienfeld brought out is that microaggressions are based on the subjective experience of the person experiencing them, and there are all kinds of things that might impact a person's experience of a microaggression. For example, there are certain personality traits, such as negative emotionality, that might lead one to be more likely to interpret an ambiguous situation as an aggression. And how now do you, how now do you resolve that? And if you're going to resolve that in terms of a perpetrator and victim story, it then becomes extremely hard to form genuine relationships if we're using those kinds of metrics. Lilienfeld also objected to the use of the term aggression because aggression suggests some motive on the part of the person who is, to use Sue's vernacular, um, creating or engaging in or committing the microaggression. And you really, that is a cognitive distortion called mind reading, and yet it was somehow taken as something that should be taken seriously. And it's not to say that there aren't subtle forms of racism that occur. There are, but there's also there could also be very healthy trainings, as you would know as a psychologist, and especially as an organizational psychologist, that help people to have fruitful and generative and warm conversations about that. In Lukianoff and Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, they give a really nice example of what a microaggression, kind of looks like when it happens. And what I mean by microaggression is there's some sort of subtle uneasiness that is occurring between two or more people, and the person who Lukianoff and Haidt are citing essentially goes back, strikes when the iron is cold, and has a very generative conversation about how her concerns got resolved, and it really worked quite well. But that's not the way that it works on university campuses. Many times, there's this sort of what's called call out culture, where the persons are continually being called out based on perceived transgressions, and then their job at that point is to apologize, show contrition, and sin no more. The problem with that is that an apology should be a very personal and meaningful thing to give. It should not be something that is given lightly or wantonly or superficially. And when in a call out culture an apology is given, the person who is apologizing, I imagine, feels just a little bit diminished by apologizing for something that they don't really feel like they should apologize for. And I think that the person who is receiving the apology probably has a sense that they are not engaged in that moment in a genuine interaction. And that, I think that also does not feel good when you can't experience genuineness in an interaction with somebody. It's just it's a creepy feeling. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on microaggressions.
Well, no, I mean, I think, when you were talking about that, I was thinking of, Benjamin Boyce's Evergreen documentary, which I think I've watched all the way through 3 or 4 times at this point, but I just watched it through again. And, another thing that, the other problem with apologies on college campuses is it doesn't stop there. They
No,
always want something else. And there's this scene
no,
in Benjamin's documentary where, like, the group of protesters has inundated the cafeteria. They've all swiped their cards, and now they're not getting the food that they feel like they deserve because the
right,
cafeteria is closed. And the administration says, well, we put the meals back on your card, like we can undo the swipe. And they didn't. That wasn't good enough.
right,
They said undo the swipe and give us free meals on top of it because you
right,
offended us. So it's like
right.
always something else. Did you find that at UVM as well?
Um, well, I don't think I ever had a situation that was quite like that. My
I
experiences
don't
with
think many people have had a situation
the
quite like that.
my experiences with students have always been very positive. They've been they often I try very hard not to say what I think in class. I try to present when we're talking about so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, I try to present multiple sides to diversity, equity, and inclusion um, lines of thinking. For example, I think Shelby Steele has some very interesting ideas about what might be considered systemic racism. Uh, it's not an easy story to tell, and it won't fit on a bumper sticker, but it's very well thought out. And I teach I teach that alongside persons like Ibram X. Kendi, and students respond to that with they don't like the ideas, but they have responded to it with a great deal of professionalism and poise, and I'm really proud of them when they speak truth to power in that way, which is a really healthy thing. So the students have been great and awesome, and um, I think the hardest thing about all this for me is that I think some may not understand um, why it is that I'm speaking out or what I'm trying to say. But what I will say is for those who are sort of the true believers on the faculty, um, I've not found a way to find common ground with them um, around these issues. For example, I suspect that the majority of the faculty at the University of Vermont and in my program and in my department, we all want the same thing, but we might have slightly different ways of thinking about how to achieve it, that we want a more just society and so forth. And there is just this, you either accept my thinking or you're a racist. I was having a conversation where a few months ago now, but my dean and my department chair were in there, and they're both university administrators. And I was trying to get them to define what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, because the meeting was about how are we going to include equity, diversity, and inclusion into the curriculum, and then how are we going to include that in the evaluation of university professors. And and if you're going to be evaluated on something, you want to know, okay, well, if I'm going to be evaluated on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to know what diversity is and what it is not, and I want to know what equity is and what it is not, and I want to know what inclusion is and what it is not. And so I was asking those kinds of questions, and one person on the faculty, who I'm a big fan of, said, well, maybe we just need to have more conversations about this and really flesh out the differences in thinking that are here. And one of the administrators said, no, there is no point in talking to Aaron. He has just got, his values are so different from the rest of ours. There's no reason to talk to him. And another administrator, yeah, it was disappointing to say the least. But another administrator, made a veiled threat about my employment, saying that maybe I wouldn't be able to have the energy to do my job well if I didn't go along with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a an intimidation tactic to say, stop asking for definitions about these terms. Just don't make noise about it. Just go along. Just go along.
Wow. So I want to ask a question about the values piece because, I grew up in Vermont. I grew up in Williamstown, about an hour south of Burlington. I often say that if I hadn't grown up in Vermont, I probably would have gone to UVM. But, growing up in Vermont, all you want to do is get the heck out of the state. So I didn't go that route. And I actually ended up going to where Kendi is now set up, Boston University, which,
Oh my.
that's a whole other thing. But Vermont is not a right-leaning place.
Yeah.
At all.
No.
Are you a staunch, covert right winger in their midst?
No, no. No, I don't know what I am. I voted Democrat all my life, and I was a big fan of Obama, and I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I donated more money than I can actually afford to Tulsi Gabbard, who I would be so proud if Tulsi Gabbard was president of
Yeah.
our United States. And so, no, I'm not on the right at all. But what I do think is that I'm politically homeless right now. That I don't seem to really fit anywhere, except that there are certain groups of people who are, um, I don't know, who seem to recognize that something is amiss, and I guess I would just call them anti-authoritarians, and some
Yeah.
of them are on the right, and some of them are on the left. But that's where I feel most comfortable now, and I guess what that makes me politically is like Dave Rubin and maybe like Benjamin Boyce and a lot of other people as a classical liberal, that
Hmm.
I feel that the critique and exchange of ideas and solutions is the engine of progress. And you can't, you cannot artificially circumscribe that process of uh, critiquing ideas and having ideas compete with other ideas in order to move society forward. In other words, you can't just say this is a good idea because I think it feels good, so this is what we're going to do. That actually stops. Ironically, that actually stops progress. And so I guess I'm a classical liberal. Maybe I don't really know what a libertarian is. That sounds maybe a little bit more right than I am, uh, but I guess I've been blue all my life. I would like to still be. I believe in the widest. Um, I want as many people as possible to enjoy their civil rights as widely as possible. I want people to experience as much freedom as they possibly can. And personally, I could not care less how a person identifies in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, whatever. I just don't even look at that. So yeah, I guess I'm sort of a classical liberal.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you mentioned the libertarians. I think that the libertarians are having their own identity crisis, right?
That's
Right?
right.
Oh, there's so much like a guilty pleasure of mine is watching the infighting within the libertarians. I just think it's fantastic. I love it. I'm,
Well, there's
there's a
no rules.
exactly. It's like this is your guys' world. Like I'm just living in it. So I want to go back to that meeting where that administrator said, Aaron doesn't share our values. What values was he talking about that he was so convinced that you don't share?
That's your guess is as good as mine. I mean, on the one hand, if your values involve dividing people up by race and then ascribing good or bad characteristics to those individuals based on race, I think you're probably right. I don't share your values. That is horrible thinking. I don't know that people who say things like that actually stop and think what they mean by their values. I think they just assume that they are on the side of the angels, and they use the term values as a cudgel to gain ideological compliance. So they tend to assume this position, and you kind of see this in the terminology they use, like critical consciousness. They perceive themselves to have had an a revelation or an experience that gives them more insight into the ills of society than other people. And because they are acting with this special knowledge, they also don't see a need to reflect on how they may be contributing to problems within society. And so self-reflection does not play in because they're too busy, using their special knowledge to deconstruct what's around them in society. And they just sort of assume that they have the good values and the good outlook, and it just does not enter into their thinking the possibility that someone could share those values but not get on board with the ideology. So I have no idea to what values they're referring, and I don't think they do either.
Hmm.
Um, uh, they it's it's a conceit that comes along with ideological isolation, that someone
Mm.
has the right values. If you are around people who only think the way you think and who only talk in terms that you talk in, then it's easy to lose touch with the outside world and to begin to think of oneself as morally infallible. And I think that is going on at the University of Vermont and probably other universities as well, to a truly alarming degree. I mean, a truly alarming degree. I don't mean to sound, I don't want to engage in hyperbole, but I do want to say we are in an incredibly serious situation right now, and it needs to change rapidly. Um, yeah, I just don't know what else to say about that.
I agree with you.
It's really it is like a this ideology is so effective. Some people have described it. I think Gad Sad defines it as like a mind virus, and and Benjamin Boyce has talked about this as well. That viruses are drawn towards certain receptors in cells. I don't know what the biology is, but this ideology, this so-called anti-racism and so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think are so effective and so virus-like in that they are drawn to the guilt receptor in human beings, that I
Mm.
think all of us, the vast majority of us have some predisposition to feel guilty about things, and the feeling of guilt is so aversive that people will do almost anything to escape it. And so they will adopt any creed, they will proselytize in the service of an ideology, they will uh, beat down the people around them, all in the service of avoiding the sense of guilt that this ideology says that they should be feeling. And this impacts this isn't just something that impacts white people. There's lots of really special cynical names that this ideology has come up with for people of color and black people who don't buy into this ideology. One of the most recent ones that I've heard, and I believe this comes from a university. Oh my God, this is so scary. Is multiracial whiteness, and
Yes.
what they're talking about is black people who won't toe the line, and so we're going to insult you by calling you white. I mean,
It's so
I'm going to
absurd.
get tearful if I talk about that much more. It's
Well, it's crazy to me because it's like, and I literally just had a conversation with a leftist last week where he was talking about how, the left is the empathetic side that listens to black voices and they understand. I'm like, hang on, no you don't. Because I was at a rally in Chicago where we had more black voices on our stage than we had white voices, and Black Lives Matter was standing there beating their drums to try to drown out those voices, and almost every single Black Lives Matter protester was white.
Yeah.
And so it's just not true. They listen to the
No.
voices. It's like an entire it's always about confirmation bias. They're always only looking for information that agrees with their worldview.
Yes, it's true. And yeah, it's really hard because I think there's a lot of people who really do want to look at America's history, with unblinking eyes and say, what is the result of 400 years of slavery and what can we do about it now? And so, and that's a very interesting conversation. I think that's a great conversation to be having on college campuses. But I don't think that, I think that what this ideology wants to do is it wants to take advantage of, or what it does do is it takes advantage of the very best that people have to offer. The part that does want things to be better for everybody. And then it says, if you truly want that, you must adopt this ideology. And if you don't adopt this ideology, it means you don't truly want that. And so it's an incredibly brilliant and incredibly manipulative ideology. It's terrifying in its how brilliantly they have taken advantage of these powerful emotions that are the best that we have to offer each other, and this ideology uses that so cynically towards its ends. It's really just gross.
It is gross, absolutely. Well, guys, if you're enjoying this chat so far with Aaron, please make sure you to hit that like button for me. It really helps me out. And also, just remember, Aaron's information is in the description below. So if you haven't seen his videos yet, make sure don't go right now because we're having a good chat. But like afterwards, make sure you watch his videos, follow him on Twitter, all that good stuff. So, Aaron, I want to go back to before you did the videos because there were years. It was
Yeah,
years leading up to this where you were trying in small ways within the university to
yeah,
question, not, I wouldn't even say fight back, but just question
yeah.
what was going on. And you were telling me before we came on the air that you were accused of walking aggressively
Oh,
at one
geez.
point.
Yeah, well, so yes, I've been talking for years. I've talked to two different presidents of the faculty senate, and I've written internal emails to the union, the faculty union, and to lots of other people. But one of the straws that broke the camel's back is that the dean sent out an email. It must be 3 weeks ago now, in which he said that conversations and interactions around the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion were causing harm uh, to faculty members, and that everyone had already agreed to this, that we'd been through a very thorough process of checking in with everybody, that they were okay with the adoption of the DEI standards. And essentially, why are you speaking up now? Just be quiet. This is going to happen whether you guys like it or not. That was the gist of the email. And I actually, so I really took issue with that on many, many grounds. But one of them was that the faculty had in any real way been consulted about what was going to be included in the diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria. Because what they did is they sent out a survey twice in which people could provide feedback, but then never released the feedback publicly.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
and then they had a meeting, and there was 22 of us in this meeting or something like that. And the people who had written the diversity, equity, and inclusion standards were there. And I was the only person in the room who spoke out against this. And I made many of the same arguments that people have heard me make in the last couple of weeks. How exactly are we defining this? What if through our research we find that these aren't sound? And I had a list of 20 questions that I had collected from faculty members and that I had come up with faculty members in private, and I presented them at this meeting or just prior to this meeting. And the person who was running the meeting came in and said, "We're not going to be answering any questions. We're just here to listen." And it's kind of like, okay. So during the meeting, I thought that they were going to be answering like, how is this going to be done? What exactly does diversity mean? And they're like, no, we're not answering any questions about this. So I made the objections that I've made, and then came to find out, and so I was the only vocal one in the room, and then came to find out later that it had subsequently been investigated because someone or a group of someone's thought that while I was in the room, I had been walking aggressively. And it just goes to show you what happens if you take a stand against this. They find a way to get you. So it's what that suggests is an environment at the university, or at least in the college in this case, where if you step out of line, if you walk the wrong way, apparently in the room, or I don't know, breathe the wrong air or whatever, they're going to find a way to investigate you for walking in an aggressive manner. Oh my God.
Well,
Yeah.
you are a
So,
white male, Aaron, so
oh,
that's, it's obvious that you're always being aggressive and toxic in everything you do.
well, I know, but I have to say, I think I kind of walk like a wimp. but it's ridiculous to assert that the faculty have been consulted in any real way, because I think that a lot of people at the University of Vermont would not be surprised to find out that after expressing vocal opposition to these kinds of proposals, that I would be accused of walking in an aggressive manner. That I think that people are terrified of um, of speaking up about this, because they know there will be consequences for you. And so the dean's assertion that this had been, discussed in any meaningful way where there was is just ridiculous. People were way too terrified to openly speak out against this, with very good reason. They would have been accused of walking in an aggressive manner too.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's so baffling to me about this whole situation with you, and I just want to put a really fine point on this. You train future psychotherapists.
Yeah,
Essentially, you are in the counseling division at
right.
UVM. So I'm going to posit that the faculty members that you have to work around are psychologists in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. And it's especially bizarre to me to think that psychologists are completely unaware that there could be differing world views. I don't understand how I mean that is what the profession is understanding different experiences in the world and what drives those experiences and what motivates those experiences. How do you get a group of literal psychologists together who cannot see that there is a different way to view the world?
Well, and I work around a lot of professors of education as well. So a lot of teachers, and
Oh,
who,
that's the
well,
problem.
even more so, you would expect that professors of education would say, wow, it's really important that we think about, I like the way John Dewey put it. The University of Vermont is closely associated with John Dewey, who is considered to be the father of progressive education. And he said that any idea or form of knowledge needs to be considered in terms of the grounds that support it and the consequences to which it might lead. And so you would think that at the University of Vermont, where John Dewey's ashes are buried, that asking important questions about the grounds that support uh, 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 critical theory and anti-racism and the consequences to which adopting anti-racism and critical theory may lead would not be a particularly controversial thing to do. But the best answer that I found to why that happened is from just a wonderful, wonderful human being and a scholar who frankly takes my breath away, and that is Jonathan Rauch. And he wrote a book called Kindly Inquisitors that was republished in 2013. And if people are curious about Jonathan Rauch, you should Google Jonathan Rauch Museum of Sex interview. He gave a wonderful talk at the Museum of Sex in Washington, D.C., and you can hear about some of his ideas there. But what he essentially said, he talks in the book Kindly Inquisitors a great deal about fundamentalism, and most people associate fundamentalism with certain brands of religion, but it's it's actually a thought style, and it's a thought style in which a person is not, in which the suppositions that inform the fundamentalist idea must be protected at all costs. And so you never question the foundations or the suppositions of the ideology. And it's more than just that, though. And you punish people who do. So if someone questions the suppositions of your ideology, they need to be punished in some way so that that doesn't happen again. And the goal of fundamentalists everywhere, they have one goal aside from punishing non-believers, and that is making more fundamentalists. And I think that walking in an aggressive manner was an interesting manifestation of fundamentalism, because in that meeting I didn't say anything particularly controversial, other than I think this is a threat to free speech. I think that this is dangerous. I think this is setting a precedent whereby we will freely allow politics to influence the curriculum at the university. And today that might be the politics that you like, but tomorrow it won't be. And I offer as evidence right before the vote in which Donald Trump lost, one of the things that he promised to do was to require patriotic education.
Yep.
And so what he was essentially doing is he was starting to play the same game. He said, okay, you want to require equity education, which is essentially, I think, like a socialist idea, then we're going to say when we get in power, you're going to have to teach patriotism. And that's really bad news for people without political power, like gay people, for example. Gay people, the way that they got the rights that they have today is by using logic to refute the misinformation that was out there about them, and saying, well, you think that we corrupt children? Where's your evidence of that? You think that gay people can't be good parents? Where's your evidence of that? And that's what allows that is one of the most fundamental protections that a free society can offer its citizens who have the least amount of power, that it insists that if you are going to make claims about them, you must have evidence to back it up. And that evidence must be looked at with skepticism, which is a disinclination to believe it until it absolutely proves itself again and again. And the university is appears to be working hard to erode that, because they're convinced that they've got the right idea, the best idea, and the idea that's going to survive for all time. And you can only think that if you are in an ideologically isolated community where no one else is saying, that's crazy. What happens if someone else comes in and thinks the same way you do, that they have the best ideas?
Mhm. It strikes me, and I when I did my dissertation, I did a qualitative dissertation, which is sometimes frowned upon, but I think it's the best methodology because I think it gives us a view into why things are happening, not just
Mhm.
like the what is happening. It's like why
Sure,
they're happening,
sure.
and it strikes me that you're in such an interesting position to maybe even do like an ethnographic study of what it's like to be like, because this is a cultural phenomenon,
Yeah, it
and
is.
studying different cultures, from dare I say, the lived experience of being immersed in those cultures it is actually a pretty rare opportunity for qualitative research. It's a really hard kind of situation to orchestrate, which is why there aren't many studies done using that methodology.
Hmm.
Have you thought about doing something? I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to observe this culture from like an outsider perspective.
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm thinking about right now is the health of my profession, which is counseling, because
Yeah.
my counseling program has a proposal to adopt a number of anti-racist guidelines, including a guideline that in so many words says that if you don't adopt the suppositions that Kendi defines in his book, you should be considered to be a racist. And another proposal in that same list is that once the program officially defines itself as anti-racist, we're going to hold a ceremony to mark our commitment to anti-racism. And it's like, oh boy.
Are you kidding?
Um, no, I'm not. I'm not kidding. At some point, I'll have to make this memo public. I just haven't had time. But no, yeah,
Wow.
racist or anti-racist, you're either one or the other, and we're going to have a ceremony to make sure that you don't, accidentally forget that that's what we are. Um,
Please get that
but
ceremony on video, Aaron. Please.
oh,
I
shoot.
will get you a hidden Project Veritas will hook you up with a hidden camera.
Oh God.
I'm not even joking. I can call Project Veritas like right now and get a hidden camera on you for this.
But what you talked about, you asked me about research and ethnography. The problem is that the counseling profession is becoming so woke
Mhm.
that it's very hard to get anything published that is critical of
Yeah.
this ideology. But there's good reason to believe. I know you and I both have friends who are involved with Counterweight, and Counterweight provides listening sessions for people who are experiencing this at work. And people are really torn up by being exposed to this ideology. It is, they're being told that they're racist. They're being told that they're not good enough. They're being told that they're not the right thing. And, that's essentially, they're losing friendships. They're falling out with their family members. And so we are going to need counselors who understand the negative impact, and we're going to need to have counselor educators like me who have studied the impact of this fundamentalist ideology on the mental health of adults and, by the way, children. But
Mhm.
because this has already wormed its way into the profession, it's now very hard to get any work that is critical of this published. So it's really it's this weird feedback loop, the way that this has made its way through academia. And so there is a phenomenon right now. Jonathan Haidt once said it's a wonderful time to be a moral psychologist to witness this, but at the same time, he's scared about what's happening in society. We are going to need research that's going to tell us how people are being impacted by this, so that we can adjust our practices accordingly. But right now, uh, the venues in which that research might be published are either woke themselves or are so intimidated that someone might make claims of racism or homophobia or transphobia against them for publishing this, that I think they have a strong disinclination uh, to to publish work that is not consistent with the anti-racist mindset as Kendi defines it. And I'm also very afraid that the bodies that accredit counseling programs, so programs are accredited, that they have to show that they are operating in line with the expectations of the professional governing bodies. I'm really terrified that they are next. Our accrediting body is called KCREP,
They're already
and
there. Yeah.
the next round of KCREP revisions will be out soon, and um, I don't know that there now exists a way to talk back to sort of this anti-racist dogma that has been widely adopted. I have done this, but there's not a convenient or easy way to make the arguments that I'm making
Mhm.
when someone can just point a finger and say white supremacist, or you're not acting consistent with our values, or you're anti-DEI, or whatever. Um, yeah, it's really scary because anti-racism is the only acceptable game in town, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, and that was actually something I was going to ask you about because the American Psychological Association,
Yeah,
totally woke
yeah,
at this point. It's scary. And
yeah,
I've heard from multiple people that they're inhibiting the publication of research that
yeah,
doesn't align with this narrative. And it's like, I mean, it's I hear from students all the time too, like psychology students that are undergraduates or in their master's programs or what have you, that they tell me they're like, I just can't, I don't know how much longer I can do this.
sure.
And they're going to
Yeah.
destroy the profession.
They are, and I think that that might happen. I think that what might have to happen is that professions and organizations and even institutions like the university are going to have to be allowed to fail and then be reinvented um, with policies in place that will keep ideological takeovers from occurring. But it's almost like this was allowed to go way too far, and then all of a sudden, uh, it became too late. And right now, I think the hypothesis that we need to take seriously the idea that it might be too late, that universities and accrediting bodies are uh, will have outlived their usefulness and will be contributing to um, destructive trends in society. Uh, I think that hypothesis now needs to be taken seriously. And again, I don't want to engage in hyperbole, but if anyone was wondering when the right time to speak up, it's it
Yesterday,
was 2 years ago, but
2 years ago.
it's
Yeah.
like today. It's
Yeah.
today. This must be stopped today. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I just don't. I do not see this as sustainable, and it's we are in trouble.
I agree with you completely. I agree it's very realistic that we may have already passed the point of no return in regards to education. And I'm talking not just higher education, but like K through 12.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to turn it around now. It's really really frightening to me. But I want to, I want to make sure we get back to your story of, leading up to blowing the
Oh, right.
whistle
Yeah.
because I know that, you talking about how this ideology impacts people leading up to you making your videos, you were getting physically sick from all of this, right?
Oh yeah, oh God. Yeah, so we got an email from our dean in 2018, and there was a movement on campus at that time called No Names for Justice, which is, and I forget exactly all of what they were doing, but one of the things that they did is they went around and they had a list of demands, and among those demands were mandatory diversity training for faculty, and then there were demands about the curriculum. And there was, as a direct result of that, our dean, who previous to that point had been talking about the importance of diversity of thought, put out a memo saying that we will now be including diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our work as a college. And it was about that time that I started to get really sick. And um, I started, I just started throwing up a lot because this was constantly on my mind. What am I going to do? I'm going to be forced to teach this. I don't believe this, and yet I'm going to be evaluated on this stuff. And so like almost every Sunday night, like clockwork, I would just think about it and think about it and think about it, and wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it, and I'd end up throwing up, and then I'd throw up after classes sometimes, because I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, did I say the wrong thing at any point during the night, or my gosh, who might be offended, or whatever. So I guess over the last 2 years, I've thrown up like 60 times, and which, of course, is way outside of normal for anyone. But it's just my nerves have been so constantly um, activated around this, and I've been so worried about this, and worried that I was going to be put in a position where I was going to have to compromise myself, where I was going to have to say, "Oh yes, here's Ibram X. Kendi. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. There's nothing in between." And there's it would just diminish me as a person to have to say that. And I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I had to say that. And so the way that I had gotten around this, I finally said, oh, okay, all right, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If the university wants me to teach about that, that's fine, but I'm going to teach it from a heterodox perspective. So I'm going to use, and I'm going to elevate minority voices. So I'm going to use only minority authors, or primarily minority authors, and I'm going to use minority authors who disagree with each other. So I would use like John McWhorter, and have John McWhorter. I would teach John McWhorter alongside of, say, Robin DiAngelo, and then I would really do my best to steel man the ideas, in good faith to my students, that I would do my very best to present the most reasonable version of what each of those authors was saying. But then around Christmas, faculty in my program, I don't know how to describe this, but sent out a public email to everyone in our program saying, Kindsvatter is teaching divisive material, or something to that effect. And that led to, what was in effect a struggle session, where I just had all this coming at me. And someone said, I didn't want to bring this up to you in person because I didn't want to hear about, because I knew you were just going to say that it's important to teach from different perspectives. And an administrator in the meeting said, yeah, I know what you mean. And so I'm like, what is wrong with teaching these different perspectives? And then that happened again, another struggle session, same thing, which is when you've got multiple people uh, sitting in a room telling you, that in so many words that you are harmful and that you don't get it and that you're doing something bad, that really has an impact on your mental health. And so following that latest struggle session, which was now about a month ago, my dean put out this email in which he said, uh, essentially resistance is futile. You've all agreed on this DEI stuff, and you're harming people um, by engaging in conversations about it. So just do it. And it was at that point, and then I responded to the dean in an email, and I said, "Would you please define harm?" Uh, and had some subsequent interactions with people that were very civil, but this was over a public listserv, so many people wrote and said, in so many words, how dare you diminish the lived experience of the people around you by asking for definitions. And then an administrator jumped on there and said, please stop interacting with Aaron. Um, the what he has expressed and the way that he's interacting with people is in conflict with the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. And at that point,
I'm
I
sorry, what?
said, okay, this is never going to be solved from within the university. This right now has to be people need to understand what is going on in the universities right now. And so that's when I decided to make that first video that's out there.
Now, to be really clear, have you done anything that is counter to the American Counseling Association's Code of Ethics?
No, and no, absolutely, absolutely not. And in fact, I think they have, because the American Counseling Code of Ethics says that counselors are do not. I should look this up. It's right. It's under the section on the therapeutic relationship. But in so many words, it says that counselors do not use the therapeutic alliance to push their ideology or thoughts, and they do not use the ideology or thoughts in session, particularly if that ideology is derogatory in nature, or if it has nothing to do with the client's goals. And I mean, that's a pretty good paraphrase of what this says. And I don't know how anyone could possibly adopt Kendi's version of anti-racism and say that that wasn't training students to push an ideology on vulnerable adults and children within the sacred space of the therapeutic alliance.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I haven't done anything that could, by the wildest throes of the imagination, be considered to be unethical. But again, the code of ethics, just like the term harm and sometimes the term lived experience, is used as a cudgel to gain ideological compliance, and that was the case here.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you reached your breaking point and you decided you were going to drop your first video.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind when you were filming the video and right before you posted it? What were you thinking?
I was thinking of my students.
Mhm.
I really appreciate all the support that I received from everyone out in the world, and people have been very generous and nice. But I knew that I knew and I know that many of my past and present students won't understand why I'm doing this, and I think a lot of them have been I don't think they've ever been exposed to a point of view other than sort of, racism and or anti-racism and critical social justice. And so, I think a lot of them would look at that and say, wow, look at that. He's actually a really bad person. And so I think I was thinking a lot. I was feeling a real sense of loss when I was doing that first video. And because I knew that, that there was going to be relational consequences for this. And, it's meant a lot to me to uh, maintain relationships with students after they graduate and so forth. And I would like to have their good opinion, and I think for a lot of them, that I may have lost that by making this video. So I guess that's what I was thinking about.
And then the video drops and it starts. I mean, I saw it on the internet, like people were tweeting about it almost immediately after you posted it. What was that experience like to kind of see this video making the rounds and to see people responding to it?
I was, I don't know. I think what my primary experience was relief, um, and not relief that people liked it, but relief that I had finally let my views be known, and that I was no longer going to have to pretend or, kind of speak in innuendo about alternatives to anti-racism. And since that video dropped, I haven't gotten sick once, nor have I felt sick. I haven't lost any sleep. My appetite has not been disturbed. And so I would have to say my general sense was one of relief. The other thing is that I'm absolutely clueless about, um, internet stuff. So someone was like, so one of my friends said, "Oh my God, your video just hit 10,000 views." And I was like, "Oh, is that a lot?" I still don't really know if that's a lot, but I was like, okay, but it was a little bit like telling me that, I don't know. I guess I just don't really understand to what extent it's had an impact or not. But the response to it seems to have been pretty positive, and I think what I managed to do in that video, and I hope in subsequent videos, was to give people a way to talk about their objections to very narrow definitions of anti-racism and to teach-ins like turning towards whiteness, and realize that having those objections and making those objections known does not make you a racist or a bad person. And so that's been very nice, and a lot of people have written to say thank you, and that the video meant a lot to them, and that's been very nice. So it's
Yeah.
great, and I got to
How
meet Benjamin Boyce, which is nice.
Yes. Benjamin is the best. And, I mean, I think, like, you purposefully came out of the closet. I accidentally came out of the closet, but, like, afterwards, I felt like I had life again. It was like
Yes.
a life affirming
Oh,
experience. And, I
yes.
talk a lot about, like, how I think it's so important for people to express themselves and express
Yeah.
themselves fully and authentically, and I think the amount that we express ourselves is reflective of our self-worth and our
Yes.
self-esteem. I feel like I've lost 20 years in age since I just started saying what I think.
It's so true. It's so true that a lot of friends and so forth were concerned about me, and they're saying, "Oh my God, have you seen what they're writing about on Twitter?" And it's like, "No, I haven't." But they're like, "I can't. Don't Aren't you concerned?" And it's like, "No, I feel great. I feel really good." And I do think that one of the reasons I was throwing up was I think it's really a terrible thing to have to give fealty to an idea because you're afraid of the consequences of not doing that, or because you know that in order to gain something good, you must do that. And that when I made that video, I had stepped away from being in a position where I was having to act in a particular way to avoid getting in trouble, and where I was having to say things in order to please people who were in power over me. And I just think that's a terrible, dehumanizing, dysregulating way to live. And when I stopped doing that, I felt better than I have felt in years, years. And just like just like you're talking about. And I still don't understand that, but that would be another, you were talking about ethnographies earlier. Wouldn't it be a good ethnography to study people who have, publicly um, come out and said that they're
Yes.
not members of this cult anymore and what that experience is like. But all I can say is that it's the best that I felt in years, despite all of the anxiety provoking things that have happened alongside that. So,
I totally, yeah, I think that would be an amazing study, and I think people really need to hear that too, because
yeah,
so many people, it's so easy to look at, the hate that, I get, or that you might get, or,
yeah,
that Jody Shaw got, or any of these
right,
things, and to think, and to think that that's all it is.
right,
Because it's so easy to put like an overemphasis on the negative rather than the positive, but
yeah.
the positive for almost, well, I actually can't think of someone that this is not true about, but I'm going to leave open the door that I could be not recollecting everyone I've ever talked to about this. Like, I cannot recall talking to a single person who has spoken out that regrets the decision.
Neither can I. And when I've been watching people like Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, and as I reflect on my own experience, I wouldn't change anything. If I had it all to do over again, I wouldn't not do that. In fact, I would have done it earlier. I wouldn't have waited so long.
Mhm.
You're talking about Jody Shaw. Jody was a major inspiration for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, if this untenured person at Smith College who does not enjoy the same protections that I do is willing to speak out, good God, man, what are you waiting for? Like, people clearly needed to hear from Jody, and I but she's just such a natural leader and naturally so secure. But I just, she was also an inspiration to me to say, listen, um, it really is okay to speak out, and and you can do that in a gentle and thoughtful way,
Mhm.
and uh, and people need that. I saw how many people, just are so thankful to Jody, because I think there really is a great deal of suffering that's associated with being on the wrong end of this ideology.
Mhm. I think that, I think that every time someone speaks out, it shows people who may or may not have even listened to any other whistleblower that they're not crazy.
Yes.
And that's something that I think, it's so easy to crave, just that valid, like, you're not crazy. If you don't buy into this, you're not crazy. And to find other people like you. And I think something as simple as a video of someone saying, like, I don't this is insane.
Yeah.
It means so much to so many people who might not have any other person in their life that's saying it out loud.
Speaking of which, I have to say that's another really interesting element to my story is that I received a message from two UVM administrators who, after my first video, who said, we think you need counseling, and provided a link to our employment assistant agency. And I'm like, you think I need counseling? Talk about, yeah. I mean, if that's the message that people are receiving, though, that if you don't buy into this and if you speak out against this, then yeah, there's something wrong with you. That's a powerful thing to hear, especially when you hear it from someone who is in a position to evaluate you. And yeah, in that case, I think having videos like mine and Jordan Peterson and yours and Benjamin Boyce's and Jody Shaw's and Breton Weinstein and Heather Hying and all of these other folks, Dave Rubin, to watch, really do provide people with a sense of community, and yes, a sense that there are reasonable people out there who do not agree with this, and that I'm okay for thinking the way that I think. And so I'll just say to people now, and I know Carlin makes this point all the time, but if you have the same doubts that Carlin and I do, you are not crazy and you are not alone. And there's going to be more and more communities coming up where we're going to discuss these ideas gently and provide good options, and we're going to get through this. But that's just getting started now. And so, but everyone I know who's involved with this is working diligently. And by the way, everyone I know who's involved with this they are also incredibly benevolent people. You were kind enough to tell me, Carlin, that you think I'm a nice guy. I have not, in the people who have supported me, not a single person, and I guess I received maybe 300 emails at this point, not a single person has said, we need to get those people or anything like that. It's just been expressions of thanks and relief and thank you for making it plain that I'm not crazy, and so the people who think this, they are not, the people who have these questions are not haters.
You mean we're not all alt-right Nazis?
Not only that, but I, even on speaking out about this, as far as I know, I haven't heard from a Nazi. I'm sure they would hate me.
I'm sure that's probably true. So what has the reaction at UVM been to your videos?
Very disappointing. Okay, so initially after I posted the first video, my dean and my department chair wrote me and suggested that I might benefit from counseling. And they also said that, well, they respect my right to express their point of views. They also reserve their right to express theirs, which is fine with me. What they also said, and I think this is a really good thing for the UVM administration to have said publicly, is that they can't force anyone to buy into their DEI values, whatever those may be. And what I hope that means then is they're going to stop their plans to evaluate faculty based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that was in the works. And I hope what they mean when they say that we can't make any one person buy into this is that they also can't make any 2 people or any 3 people or any 4 people or any 5 people buy into this. And so they can't, despite the enthusiasm of the faculty union for adopting diversity, equity, and inclusion into faculty annual evaluations, it sounds like the the faculty administration has actually been the adults in the room and said, oh, no, we can't do this. You would think that United Academics and the American Association of University Professors would have been to the first ones to the table on that, but they're behind this 100% on our campus. Anyway, so they sent me that email saying, you're crazy, and you should go get some counseling. And I wrote back to them, and I said, I'm not, and but I think I pointed out some serious flaws in your plan, and if you would like to put out a message, this was right before all my interviews started. And I said, if you would like to put out a message, something to the effect that diversity requires diversity of thought, and that inclusion involves inclusion of multiple perspectives, and so forth, that I would be willing to talk about that change in all of my interviews, and that I would not take credit for it in any way for that change having been made. And then I also said, I'll stop making videos and you'll never hear from me again. All I want is I don't want the counseling program to be in a position where budding therapists are going to think it's the right thing to do to tell people in mental distress that they should be understood as either racist or anti-racist. And I don't want our school counselors taking that message out into the schools. So I want that policy proposal to not be passed. And if someone else wants to make that happen, I don't need to take credit for it. I told them I wouldn't take a victory lap if things changed, that I would just disappear and I would never say anything publicly about this at all. So I sent that email back to them, and the next day, the dean and the provost sent the letter out that I made public, I think yesterday, and made a public response to, in which the dean and the provost start out by saying the values in my my posts and in my video do not represent the values of the university. Again, there's that word values. And also celebrated the fact that the core faculty in my program and some of the students had started this petition against me demanding my resignation. The provost said that was a good thing to do. Unbelievable.
Well, we sure showed them, because
little did you know I have friends in low places.
Exactly. So if you guys haven't heard, in response to the petition demanding Aaron's resignation, I started a counter petition demanding that Aaron be put in charge of all diversity initiatives at UVM. And I believe that my petition has about 1,000 more signatures than theirs, even though it was started 4 days later. So I feel pretty proud of myself for that one.
I almost felt sorry. I was like, oh my God, I've turned Carlin loose on the dean and provost. What have I done? I can't watch.
Hey, I am like a mama hen. When someone goes after someone that I care about, I will be right there to say no.
You are really something, and that petition, I think brought an element of levity to the situation that was badly needed, and my wife in particular, she's obviously been, she doesn't like to see these things said about me, and to hear nice things said about me on that counter petition, it brought her a great deal of comfort, Carlin. So thank you in all seriousness.
I appreciate that greatly. And folks, if you have not yet signed the counter petition, the link is in the description below. It is change.org/Aaron Rules. I'm somewhat shocked that change.org has not removed the petition yet, because they removed every other petition I've ever started on there. But I guess this is progress. So, Aaron, I want to ask you one last question, and then I just have to pop off the screen really quickly because I have a clandestine operation going over here. I just need to check in with real quick, but I'll pop you up so you're the full screen, and I'll be listening to your answer, and then we can do some super chats. But
Okay.
if you do you have any advice to give to someone who might be in your position at another university or anywhere else that is thinking about speaking out like this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess my first advice, and maybe my only advice, is to find a supportive community, because I never could have done this and faced the consequences of it without having a group of supportive friends who really understand the situation and who know me and who I could debrief with. So I think that's the first thing, is make sure that you're part of a supportive community. I think the other thing, Lee Jessam put out on his Psychology Today blog a series, and I think Jody tweeted this out at some point, but he has a series of steps that faculty members who find themselves in this kind of situation should take. There is the impulse to immediately respond. When the provost writes and says this person does not represent the values of the university, there's the immediate impulse to become defensive, and I would say don't do that. Don't be defensive. Don't respond emotionally. Think of this as as dispassionately as you would think of a game of chess. And if you're not feeling dispassionate, go to your community of support, go to your friends and talk the situation over with them. But the main thing you have to have, if you're going to do this, is you have to know for sure that you are not a racist, you're not a sexist, you're not any of the things that people are going to call you, and you have to have a really good idea of who you are and understand that that's okay. Who you are is okay. And that there might be consequences to your speaking out, but you don't know yet what the benefits of speaking out might be. And so I'm not saying that people should do this wantonly, but my life is a lot better, and there might be financial consequences for me and so forth as a result of this, but I'm living a lot better now than I was in the week prior to going public about this. So I guess that's what I would say. And I would also like to just address, because other people have been saying, well, what can I do? What can I do? If you want to do something right now, if you want this to stop, reach out to your alma maters and ask them if they have DEI criteria. And if those DEI criteria are well defined, and ask them if diversity includes diversity of thought, and if inclusion involves inclusion of multiple perspectives. And if they don't get back to you, or they can't provide evidence that DEI includes diversity of thought and inclusion of multiple perspectives, then you tell them that you're not going to give them another dime until they do. And that's what I did with my alma mater, which is Kent State University. I said, I asked those questions to a very nice person who contacted me asking for money, and she said, oh, I'll put you in touch with our, vice provost of diversity, equity, inclusion. And then the person wrote me back and said, oh, the provost doesn't want to meet with you. And I said, oh, well, I understand. I'm not surprised. But Kent State University, where I had a wonderful experience, by the way, and where my father worked, and I loved all my professors, Um, but I'm not going to give them another dime until they shape up and start doing what they're supposed to be doing again.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously, Boston University is not getting another cent of my money anytime soon. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's wonderful advice, and I just want to echo what Aaron said. Is like I think it's really simple to kind of think about the consequences of speaking up, and you see this played out every single day with cancel culture and a new person getting canceled and a new thing getting canceled. But no one ever really talks about the benefits of it, and I wouldn't go back at all.
Yeah.
And I have never spoken to anyone that would do it over again. Even if you have to figure out another way to make a living,
Yeah.
there are a million ways to make money in the world. You can
Yeah.
make money doing so many different things, and you shouldn't let that fear hold you back from doing what you know is right.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
All right. Aaron, want to do some super chats?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Alexander DeJohn says, both of you are amazing. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you, Alexander. Arn, thank you for the super chat. Patrick Justice says, these anti-racists are the new religious Puritans. They hold mob trials and burn you at the stake when you're found guilty. They truly believe that they are doing the right thing. And if you disagree, that proves you're a witch. Aaron, do you think that this is a religion?
Yes. Well, I think it's fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fundamentalism that it's well on its way to becoming a religion. John McWhorter has argued convincingly about why, and so has James Lindsay, about why this constitutes a religion. And certainly in my program, there's a program proposal to hold a ceremony to mark the transition of the graduate counseling program at the University of Vermont to an anti-racist program. And there certainly seems to be a religious element to cementing a commitment. And I think when you start talking about rituals, the point of a ritual is to bond people to an idea, to help them to suspend disbelief. And that strikes me as close to a very religious thinking.
I 100% agree. David Skinmore says, do you think that this constant oppressor / victim narrative drives a lot of the violence today? What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I don't know if it's the victim narrative that drives violence, but I think that once people begin thinking of themselves as victims, and the flip side of that is thinking of other people as victimizers, then they can justify behavior that they would ordinarily never engage in. And I'm thinking of the students, was it at Yale, who were demanding the job of what's his name, Christophilus?
Yeah.
I can't
Something
think
like
of
that.
his name right off the top of my head, but they had people screaming in this man's face, saying they wanted his job to be taken away from him. And I think, like, to wish that kind of harm on somebody, you do need to be trapped into some kind of narrative. And there is an article out there called Microaggressions in the Rise of Victimhood Culture. I'm blanking on the author's name at the moment. It just won't come to me. But he defines victimhood culture as a sensitivity to slight, a moral dependency on some kind of authority to rectify the situation for you, and a desire to see the person who is engaged in the slight punished. And that overlaps a lot with fundamentalism, as Jonathan Rauch defines it. But that's also an excellent description of what's going on campus today, particularly with the sensitivity to slight and the moral dependency on authority. So none of the people who signed, for example, the petition to have me fired contacted me and said, I have a problem with you, they all contacted, the provost and the department chair and so forth. So it's people, this culture is not interested in dialogue or trying to work things out. They are interested in power and punishment. And that's a very scary thing, especially because this kind of thinking is not tied to any particular group of people or any particular ideology. So that what we're seeing right now from the left could just as easily recur on the right.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so we need to play the long game of advocacy and realize that the moment that we allow these kinds of behaviors to become common on campus or in the workplace, uh, we are really doing a major disservice to society. And it may not show up today or tomorrow, but down the road, it will show up, and it's going to come back on people who need uh, liberal principles in order to advocate for themselves. And this ideology is trying to get rid of those liberal principles. It's quite horrifying.
I 100% agree with you that this could happen on the right, and I actually I'm worried. Everything has an equal and opposite reaction, right?
Yeah,
Life has a way of balancing things out, and I think there could be, and maybe we're already starting to see it. There could be a rise of a fundamentalist movement on the right that is specifically because they are reacting to what has gone on the left.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's John McWhorter has mentioned this, that he's starting to see some signs of this. And yeah, it's really it's what I wish people would think about is the long game of advocacy. It's not about what feels good today or what policy would make people feel safe on campus. You've got to think about what the long-term consequences of these styles of thinking are. And that is not nearly uh, as present in the conversations as it needs to be on campus. Nobody thinks about what's 5 or 10 years down the road. It's all about, oh my gosh, such and though didn't feel safe because someone said that. And so now we have to have a new policy and a bias defense system. I mean, what Jonathan Rauch makes a really good point in his book, Kindly Inquisitors, that if you had had a bias response system in the 1950s, what they would have been looking for is anyone who was uttering pro-gay kinds of sentiments, and then you would be reported there. And so we just really got to be smart about thinking about what the unintended consequences down the road of these policies and these ways of thinking can be. And yes, I think victimhood culture has been well described, and it is very present on campus.
All right, let's see. Zinni the
Campbell and
Flute.
Manning is the name. Campbell and Manning.
Campbell and Manning. All right. Zinni the Flu says resolution I-52 white supremacy culture from the National Education Association. And I actually Googled it really quickly while we were chatting and I found it. And there it is. The Representative Assembly adopts NEA Resolution I-52, which acknowledges the existence of white supremacy culture as a primary root cause of institutional racism, structural racism, and white privilege. National Education Association. Congratulations, folks.
Oh man.
It is a big problem. It is. All right,
Well,
guys. Go
these
ahead,
are the
Aaron.
people who are going to be teaching your kids. Like the
Yeah.
the only people who can stop this are the individuals who are listening, who are going to say, "Is that in my school? I'm taking my kids out." And this needs to be legislated. Like
Oh.
we need court decisions around this kind of nonsense, because I would just love for them to define What precisely is white supremacy and white supremacy not? What precisely is white privilege and white privilege not? And where do you think the conversation about white privilege is going to go? Are there other races that enjoy more privilege than another race? And so are we going to then start hearing, and I've already heard whispers of this, about Asian privilege and about brown privilege.
Oh
This is just toxic, and uh, I it's terrifying that organizations that should damn well know better are passing resolutions like that. That's just
yeah.
incredibly irresponsible.
I agree. Well, speaking of legislation, I do actually have a meeting in about 15 minutes with the group of people in New Hampshire who are trying to legislate in this. So we're gonna have to motor through the rest of these super chats. Let's see. The Legion of Reason says the tail wagging the dog. Why universities entertain this nonsense and not their faculty is beyond me. I would completely agree with that. Awesome.
Administrative bloat. That
Oh yeah. Oh,
universities have too much money that they're misallocating by hiring administrators. And what administrators do is they sit around and they administrate all day. And that means that they make up policies. So, yes, you need to not feed the beast.
One of my plans at some point is I want to make a list of every diversity professional in higher education and their salaries, because we have access to all this information. They have to file it on their tax forms. So that's one of my projects at some
Good
point.
project.
Awesome Human says, I worked at a school and was told not to look students in the eye to avoid microaggressions. It pits students against students, teachers against teachers, and people against people. Yes, it does. Alexander DeJohn says, we got to start creating our own publishing companies to get the word out. That's true. I've got a whole separate rant about publishing that I will do another day. I'll tell you what, I'm not happy with the publishing industry right this second. Patrick Justice says Mr. Kindsvatter needs to testify before Congress on this, along with all the other educators and what is going on inside these institutions. I hope that you do someday, Aaron. I just don't have a whole lot of hope for it given the current makeup of Congress, but who knows? Stranger things have happened.
No, they ask, I'll be there.
Max S says, Professor Kindsvatter, please write a book, start a podcast, and carve a path for so many others afraid to speak up as you were. This is your classroom. What do you think of that, Aaron?
I think that I don't want to do that. I just want to teach counseling and do counseling. I'm sorry to disappoint. Brett Weinstein, he'll do it.
Yes. Not everyone wants to be a public person at the end of the day.
I don't. I'm looking forward to stepping out of the spotlight as soon as I can accomplish something at the University of Vermont.
Absolutely. Althea, thank you for that super chat. Common Core says there is no friendship in allyship. It implies a temporary transaction between people of different tribes that are at war. It ruins the natural bonding process between individuals of different races.
And it also makes people feel starved for genuineness, because it's really hard to have a genuine relationship with someone where the relationship is defined by conformity to allyship rather than unconditional positive regard.
I completely agree. Andrea says the only way to get change is to fight back. Althea says United Methodist Church lent classes and fasting to repent for the sin of racism. It really bothers me that churches are getting involved in all of this, to be very honest.
This is where people are going to see it coming in.
Yeah,
that's where people who are on campus are going to see it next, is in church.
Got a couple more. Jenny's getting inky with it. Says people now expect mommy authority to make right their grievance. If kids don't learn to deal with differences, they are incapacitated to deal with as an adult.
That's Campbell and Manning's work. They talk about that phenomenon exactly.
Cool.
That's moral dependency.
And our last super chat for today, Jaya says, I'm so excited to see you here, Dr. Kindsvatter. Hopefully conversations like this will inspire people to finally take action. I agree.
Well, all right. Thanks for checking in. You have taken action.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I wish we had another 2 hours, but we'll have to have you back at some point and get an update along your journey. And, I'm just so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that you spoke up, and I know you've inspired thousands and thousands of people, and hopefully, many more will come after you. So thank you for your service to all of us.
Well, Carlin, thank you. It's been a real pleasure spending this time with you.
All right. Well, guys, that's all we have for today. Again, hit that like button on the way out the door, and Aaron's information is in the description below. So if you have not yet subscribed to his channel to see his videos, please do that. You can follow him on Twitter. You can sign the petition to put him in charge of all diversity initiatives at UVM, which I think is a long shot, but you never know. Apparently, they listen to petitions. But thank you for spending some time with us, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.